Hey everybody, Garry Adelman, American Battlefield Trust. That's Kris Mackowski behind the camera. We got Kris White coming on shortly, and we are happy to be here. Vicksburg 160, and there's so much cool stuff going on around us. We're going to try to show you a lot of this stuff, but we're going to leave that to Kris White. But for now, just by way of reminder, know that we are at a place called Battery de Gaulier. We're looking from the Union line over toward the Confederate lines, and just so we're on the same page here, on May 18th, the Union arrives and the Confederates are in their siege line. On May 19th, they're going to launch an attack to the north of us. On May 22nd, there's going to be another set of attacks, and then there's going to also be a long siege after that, but there's a lot going on in between, and some of that concerns where we stand right now. We're at Battery de Gaulier. Let's bring on Kris White to talk about that.
All right, thanks, Gary. I want to welcome you to Vicksburg National Military Park, founded in 1899. This is the fifth of 5 battlefield parks that was created around the late 19th century, and that includes Gettysburg, Antietam, Shiloh, Chickamauga, Chattanooga National Military Park, and then here at Vicksburg. So I want to get you oriented, and then we are going to do something that is either going to be an epic fail or awesome. We're going to jump into the Bighorn and take a drive up and around to the Illinois Monument and then up to the 3rd Louisiana Redan.
Epic fail.
Let's get you oriented, and watch out when you're at Vicksburg for these types of hills.
Oh,
this is a fire ant hill. You'll know if you're in it very quickly. They are all over the place. What we're going to do is get you a quick orientation. So as we're standing here, basically, I'm going to go right about here. You're now facing roughly due west. Out in that direction would be the Mississippi River in 1863. Also looking across this very rolling terrain. There's going to go into deep canyons, some rolling hills, knolls. This terrain will change very, very dramatically. But you're looking out into the distance towards a large monument, a pillared monument, and that's the Louisiana Monument here at Vicksburg. And you're looking towards the 3rd Louisiana Redan out there towards the west. Now, if we kind of turn towards the northwest, you're going to see a large pantheon up on top of the hill. That's the Illinois Monument. That is the largest monument on this battlefield here, and it has more than 34,000 names of every Illinois soldier who fought here at Vicksburg. We also have some of the famous folks from Illinois as well, including the President of the United States at the time, Abraham Lincoln. He'll be on there, even though Lincoln doesn't fight here, obviously, at Vicksburg. He is the commander-in-chief. Out in this valley between this no man's land where we're standing, you might see a structure that is not a wartime structure. That is actually the original visitor center here at Vicksburg National Military Park, or one of the early visitor centers here at Vicksburg National Military Park, and it was once the superintendent's house. We've been told that that's slated to come down eventually. Yes. Then up just to your right of that pantheon, you'll have the Shirley House. That is the only wartime structure here in Vicksburg National Military Park that will survive the battle, and one of the most famous pictures of all time taken here at Vicksburg was taken near the Shirley House. And you'll see a number of shebangs, which are simply kind of half tents or little shelter halves that are being put up all around it, and it'll look like people have just dug into this earth like moles or like groundhogs all around the Shirley House, and the topography out here will change dramatically, but that is a wartime structure. Where we're standing along Union Avenue, and we're out here by Stephen de Gaulier's battery, and de Gaulier would be out here along Union Avenue. So what we're seeing here is on one side of this vista we have where we're standing on the federal lines. On the far side we'll have the 3rd Louisiana Redan, and the two sides will come ever closer together out here at Vicksburg, because that is the idea of a siege. The Federals might set up at one point and then move closer using what are called parallels. In theory, you'll set up a first parallel, which will be your first line. Then you'll go to a second parallel, then a third, and by the time you've created that third, you should be so close that you can jump out and surprise the enemy as quickly as possible, overwhelm them. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump in the vehicle, we're going to drive around part of this line, talk a little bit about this line of circumvallation. That is the technical term for the siege line here at Vicksburg for Grant's siege line. He'll have 2 separate lines, one known as this circumvallation, one known as countervallation. The line of circumvallation is simply going to encircle John Pemberton and his army here at Vicksburg, the Confederate Army of about 33,000 men. And this line will be encircled for more than 9 miles. And it will be defending the city of Vicksburg, which is off in that direction from where we're standing. and then we'll have a countervallation line, which is pointed off in the opposite direction. And that is to protect us from Joe Johnston, the most aggressive commander in the Confederate Army.
The Army of Relief.
Yeah, the Army of Relief, which there's no relief there. He's supposed to be, I had a bad joke there, I'm not going to bring it in. But he's supposed to come in here and he's supposed to help relieve the siege here at Vicksburg. And he'll send many, many messages saying, I'm coming, I'm coming, I'm coming. He's never showing up. He's like, you know, he's going to ghost the army here at Vicksburg, like we would say in modern terms. As we stand up here, we'll see cannon. We'll also drive past monuments, markers, tablets, all kinds of different items. These guns up here in Barbette will be overlooking this no man's land between us and the 3rd Louisiana Redan. So let's head down to the truck and jump on in.
While we head on down there, just know that this is Samuel DeGolier will be mortally wounded.
And Gary's taken away from my story, so here we go.
Okay, well, were you going to do that in the truck?
Yes, I was.
Well, I had to come on and correct the Stephen versus Samuel DeGolier thing. Let me say, if it's not a story, then let me say that 1/10 of all the Union guns here at Vicksburg are positioned right here. 22 guns out of 220 are positioned in this particular battery, and that's all I got to say about that. That wasn't too bad, actually. A little bit better than I usually do that. Let's hop back in the truck. This is how we always roll. We get Kris White rents the largest truck we can find, and we just tool around these things. Let's see how this first transition into the truck goes.
We are in Mississippi, and if we don't have a truck, we're going to stand out.
I did notice since we've gotten down here, Kris is more likely to say Redan instead of Redan, so we are acclimating. All right, remember you're heading about roughly, we're going to head about roughly north. And Kris, what do you got?
So DeGolier is actually going to be down in this valley off to our right-hand side. He will actually not be up in with his battery whenever, as Garry said, he is mortally wounded. A Confederate bullet somehow comes over top of this work, arcs down, and actually hits him in the camp. And when he's down in his camp, he's actually hitting a leg. He's going to linger for a while, and he is mortally wounded. Somebody is not wearing their seatbelt.
Kris Mackowski, I can't believe you would do such a thing.
Thank you, cameraman, who was wearing his seatbelt. As we roll along here, you might notice some signs. You're going to see some blue signs poking up. These are signs placed here by the War Department. They'll be blue for Union or the North or the Yankees, and red for the Confederates, the Southerners, the rebels. And the idea is to mark this battlefield up for future generations to come out here and learn. It's a national military park, so we want the military to come out here and learn while they're out here. They can conduct what we call staff rides. Initially, a staff ride was a general officer taking his staff on horseback on a ride across the battlefield. And these start to come about in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s.
Boom.
So this is one of the reasons that Vicksburg National Military Park is founded. Another thing that we'll see out here with these signs, it's going to tell you it's a Union trench. This is John Logan's division, an Illinois soldier, probably the best political general in either army, arguably. And he does a very, very good job of commanding troops throughout the Western campaigns. But I'm stopped here for just a moment to look up towards the Illinois monument. That's a Pantheon monument there. But if you look towards the middle ground in the picture, you might notice a couple blue signs just sitting out there, and they're telling us a story. And the story that they are telling us here is that these were original trenches from this area that the Federals dug in here. After the siege of Vicksburg, most of the Federal fortifications are actually destroyed. People say, oh man, this would have been great to have them for preservation. They would tell a story. But Ulysses S. Grant is worried about that Army of Relief if Joe Johnston shows up and he captures the city, which surrenders on July 4th, 1863. If the Confederates if the Confederates come back and he's inside the city, now we just have a role reversal. The Confederates can come in, man those Federal lines, and now they have ready-made siege lines. So Grant has most of those lines, actually, the fortifications, destroyed after the siege of Vicksburg.
It's fascinating. I don't think most people know that. And what a smart thing to do. Why, if his lines were so good, why let the enemy use them if they're going to come back?
Exactly. They were effective. They won the siege. And there's John Logan standing up there looking at us. You can see Illinois commanding the 3rd Division of the 17th Army Corps. That's under James Birdsey McPherson. As our friend Doug Ullman says, there's no fear in McPherson. And this is us now approaching the Illinois State Memorial here at Vicksburg. Now, the monuments that you see up here, most of them are not placed here by the War Department. They are placed by the states or private organizations. United Daughters of the Confederacy, the state of Arkansas, the state of Illinois. These are going to be all entities that will place monuments and memorials up here. And when we have them placed up here, the War Department will help to supplement them by adding in these plaques that talk about every brigade, regiment, battery, the Army itself. So they're out here for more informational purposes, whereas these large Pantheon-style memorials memorialize the men and honor them.
Thanks, Kris. I want to tie up a little bit with Samuel DeGolyer, a Michigander. He was a soldier of the 4th Michigan, and he is going to be mortally wounded here, as Kris noted, and he is buried in Michigan to this day, Hudson, Michigan, maybe. But what I want to note about that is he is not shot, like Kris said, he's shot in camp. He's not shot in the big attacks on the 19th or the 22nd. He is shot, in between them, like in late June. He's not shot when the mine is being exploded or something. He is simply part of this siege that often gets the short shrift. People talk about the siege lines, but the siege itself is deadly. Let's keep walking, I think, do the Shirley House first, and then we'll double back this way. This house that you can see over my shoulder here, this is the Shirley House. It's known as Wexford Lodge. It's owned, of course, by the Shirleys. They are both from New England. James Shirley is from New Hampshire, I believe, and they are Union sentiment. And we've heard on some of the other videos already that we are talking about Warren County is not all pro-secession, quite the reverse. In fact, the city of Vicksburg is sort of anti-secession at the time, but you go with your state. Oh my God, is Kris Mackowski going to walk up these stairs backward? Actually, I don't know if we want to go up right now. I think I want to come over this way to the location of the photo. I think we gotta.
I actually thought you were going to tease him and make him go back up the stairs the second time backwards.
we do like to tease. Actually, now that I think about it, hey, will you flip around though and look right up the stairs there, directly into the middle, because I don't break out much architectural history, but if you can zoom in, Kris, on that half, you don't have to go all the way up there, on that shape above, right up on above the portico there, that is called what most Americans would call an abivent, or in French is an abavant. It is meant to allow the wind to come in, or block the wind, but let the light in. So, important architectural history on the only surviving structure in the park from the battle and siege of Vicksburg. Kris, anything to add before we get there?
Not yet, but I do want to say that you can actually, not much to add, but you can see from this perspective, these are the backside of some of those original parallels that are being put in here, these trench lines. So if you stand up near the Shirley House, you can see the backside of those blue signs. Again, those are markers out here on the battlefield, and you can see these little divots in the ground. That will be the original approaches, some of the original approaches that we'll see out in this area of trench lines. And this place is just dotted with different approaches. Some say 12, some say 13, 14 approaches, which will help you approach the Confederate line. So you have to get towards them. We'll see some of those later on.
I just, and I was going to keep walking, but it's so incredible to stand here and look at it. You can see it on video, but it's not going to be as good. And now the way they did that, Kris mentioned it, this zigzag idea, you could sort of make it that way and then start to dig this way and then start to dig that way, zigzagging. But what they also employed here was a whole lot of sap rolling. So you could put something literally on a cart that was thick enough with cotton or hay or straw or whatever, and if it's 8 feet thick, nothing's going to get through it, and you can advance under the cover of it while you dig. So they use that. You could also have smaller rollers that you could hand roll and whatnot. And in that fashion, they're going to cross this whole position here, especially right on this road where we stand, the old Jackson Road.
Yes, a sapper is another term out here sometimes for engineers, which is technically just kind of a loose term for it. But a sapper is somebody who helps to build fortifications. So you'll hear this a lot during the First World War. You'll also hear it in the British Army today. And the sap roller, as Garry said, if you can't approach on that zigzag, you get behind this thing, and that's what's going to give you cover. And sharpshooters are a real problem out here on both sides for both armies because, if you pop your head up immediately, you're probably going to take a bullet. On the other side of the railroad redoubt, which is on the other side of the Park Visitor Center, off in that direction from where we are, one of the Confederate brigade commanders over there, I think it's Garrett, he pops his head up and said, "There's not a bullet that can kill me on this battlefield." And well, there was. And it he came over the top, he popped his head over, and he was hit right in the head, and that would kill him instantly. Kind of like the John Sedgwick of the Western Theater.
Well, and I like to tempt fate sometimes, but man, on a battlefield, that just seems like a bad idea.
What was it? Ed Barr said you never want a fort named after you because you probably died because
There you go,
of it.
such as Battery de Gaulier.
Yeah.
Come on up here, Kris. Our feet are going to get wet, but man, in the service of lining something up, I'm going to now remove my photo book and maybe the Trust map book from the new American Battlefield Trust Tahoma bags that you can get at shop.battlefields.org. How unlike us to do something like this, but you know, it holds your stuff perfectly on the battlefield.
Oh, Gary, I'm just curious, could you get this on battlefields.org as well?
Yes, as a matter of fact, battle maps of the Western Theater. I think this was written by a guy named Christoph White, or I think it was Christopher White, so we can and we could go and check out the fighting on May 19th, the fighting on May 22nd, in 3 maps of Vicksburg, and we cover as much of the Western Theater as we could.
And I don't want to interrupt you, but Kris, don't stand here.
Yeah, come on, follow me in, man, and I don't think we're going to get much closer than this, but come right here, look this way, Kris, and you're going to be looking at the best we can. You might want to shove the camera right there of this photo here. You can see the Shirley House, Wexford Lodge there. You can see that the works are actually right up to the house. And here you can see on the hillside right in front of us, the Illinois, as Kris said, shebangs covering the hillside there. And the Shirley House, now pan up to that, and you're seeing the Shirley House in a very similar angle right there. Right there through the trees. That's the best we can do. We'll show you a better view as we start to walk back, but I thought it worthwhile to see this very gully that appears so well in the photos there. Just right there. And man, you know, among the thousands of projects that we wish parks would do and for which Congress has not always appropriated enough money, maintenance project is to clear this so we could see this beautiful vista again. It would be beautiful now. Wasn't so beautiful then. Kris?
I was just making sure you guys didn't step on the fire ant hill.
Thank you.
Down this way, I just want to point out we're not going in this direction. Just for a moment, you'll notice how the road today, Union Avenue, turns off into that direction. But this is actually the way the Jackson Road used to run. And you can see that there are monuments and markers along there. So you're like, why are these things here? Well, there were road systems here in the park. Some of them were here before the park was established. Some of them are established after the park. There's some land swaps that come in. There's this road you might see that's called Mission 66 that runs through the park. So there's a lot of changes to what we call the cultural landscape out here. So over time, you might see some things that were here maybe during the war but aren't anymore, or things that were put in after the war to help visitors like us come across these battlefields and figure out exactly where we're going. And that's a perfect example of a road that was once here and is now showing where there should be monuments, and probably people don't walk out there anymore because there's not a roadway. But if you come out here to Vicksburg, you stand at the Shirley House, you look out in that direction, go visit a part of the park that most people probably just don't take 10 minutes and walk down.
And let me
like us.
And let me assure you of the import of this road on the operations on May 19th and May 22nd. But first, take a quick look at the Shirley House there. You know, we're not going to go all the way up to it, so here's your view from here, so enjoy it. We hope you'll come to Vicksburg, check it out, walk around and learn a little bit more about the Shirleys. Again, Wexford Lodge, that makes it sound much more important. In the Civil War, especially in the South, you had modest structures with grand names. So this is the old Jackson Road, and you're going to have some troops on May 19th and a whole lot of troops on May 22nd and a whole lot more troops again after the mines are exploded as we get along further along this road. So know that while you're looking at concrete now, this is a historic road that figured prominently in some of the most important actions here at Vicksburg. This is probably why this is going to be our longest video. There is so much not only to see, but so much to talk about here. Now, one of the things you got to talk about is when this attack was going on the 19th, a lot of it was going on to the north, and we're going to cover some of that. And this might be sort of closer to the left of that, but then this will become a real focal point on the 22nd, and then into late June when mines are dug under the Confederate positions. It sounds like Kris Mackowski wants to say something here. So
just a quick little additional note about the Shirley House. So Adeline Shirley was home at the time, and Confederates, as they were falling back into the city, were actually burning the houses that were in front of their lines so that the Federals couldn't use them as sharpshooter dens. And actually Confederates came up to the Shirley house with torch in hand, getting ready to burn it. And she came out, she was at home with her 15-year-old son, Quincy. They had several servants that were there. And she begs, please, please, don't burn the house, don't burn the house. They're like, we gotta burn the house, ma'am. And she takes a second to beg, and just as she does, Federals start showing up down the Jackson Road. And as they do, one of them takes a shot and kills the Confederate who's got the torch. And so on her front porch is the man who was going to burn her house, killed dead. And that's why the Shirley house still exists today as the only structure, because Confederates had torched the rest.
Let's allow this Illinois boy then to at least, Kris will probably have a lot more to say than I do about this, and I know he has one particularly cool story to share. But look at this massive monument, okay? Illinois does have the most troops here, I believe, on either side. You've got 8 Union states, 7 Confederate states, but this is different. We're not in the East anymore. You know, you're talking about a lot of Illinois, Ohio, Missouri on both sides. You've got, you know, a whole lot of Mississippi and Louisiana soldiers here as well. You got a little bit of West Virginia, even though we're talking about May of 1863. It's a little bit dicey on the timing of West Virginia actually becoming a state. But this thing, as you'll see, it's massive. I assume we're going to pop in real quick and then pop back out. But what I like as an Illinois boy, you know, vote once, vote often, is that 1/5 of the entire state budget for the state of Illinois in, I believe, 1905, the monument was erected in 1906, went toward this monument. And it really speaks to how much of the country's legislatures and our Congress was populated by Civil War veterans. They could remember what they had done so long ago.
Yeah, and it cost about $194,000+ in that time to actually build this monument. There's anywhere between 34,000 and 36,000 soldiers from Illinois who fight here. The numbers change whenever you start seeing how many are on the monument. Some say, oh, 34,000, some say 36,000. I worked on a monument project for the trust for 2 years, and I can tell you there's a lot of disagreement about monuments. But I can tell you it's 62 feet high. It's made out of stone mountain granite at the bottom, and on top of it, it's adorned with a gold eagle. Now that gold eagle over time kind of started to fade. So we have a friend, he's an old horse trader, Brigadier General Parker Hills. Parker is a friend out here at Vicksburg, and he decided that we needed to get that eagle refurbished and get it back up there. Being that he's a good old general officer, he had a little bit of sway. And he couldn't figure out how to get the eagle back up there. He decided the best way to do it, get a helicopter. Pop it onto the helicopter, drop it back on, reattach it. And that's how General Parker Hills helped put that eagle back up there during one of the refurbishments of this monument.
I think there might be a slight echo in here. I'm not quite sure. Pan up here, Kris, so you can see the open air Pantheon approach here. This is smaller than the Pantheon in Rome, and but you can see it's clearly impressive. We're not going to spend much time in here. By the way, why would somebody want 36,000 soldiers on this monument instead of 34? Well, the Pennsylvania monument at where? Gettysburg has 34,530 names. Wouldn't it be nice if Illinois had a little bit more here at Vicksburg?
Okay, it was 23 minutes and 11 seconds that it took for him to talk about Gettysburg.
Not bad. What I'll say is that I think I'm going to call an audible here. We're going to go ahead and count those names and see just how many names are on this monument. Make sure you come in here. It's really cool to see. We got to spend a little bit more time in here yesterday before we came, and we're going to head on down here.
47 steps, one for each day of the siege.
Good, good. I like that. Don't fall down those 47 steps. If you are able, Kris, focus on this, because I hope you can't get enough of this view. That's Kris, and all y'all watching. Confederate line on the right over there. You can probably see some of the red signs at the highest point in Warren County, Mississippi. The incredible no man's land where all of these approaches Kris was talking about before us, and the Union line over there. This is, again, standing here, I don't know of a more understandable or cooler Civil War place on any major battlefield.
So are we getting in the Bighorn or are we walking, boys?
I think we're going to get in the Bighorn.
All right.
That is, for this trip at least, Kris White's nickname. And now on video, we are memorializing Bighorn right here. What do you think, Kris Mackowski? You're going to have to yell because you don't have a mic, but does it fit?
He is the big horn.
I think it's saying that about my big mouth.
You're with the American Battlefield Trust and 3 weirdos and nerds who love American history and love talking about the Civil War. And here we are at Vicksburg. It's Vicksburg 160, and we're going to try to accomplish this difficult entry into the truck again. Here comes Kris.
just want to point out one of the interpretive signs. This is not a monument, memorial, or marker. This is what we call an interpretive sign. This is a modern sign. Lots of people think that these are monuments. But what this tells us very quickly is about the art on this battlefield. This is one of the greatest collection of open air statuary in all the world. Pound for pound, this is probably the most memorialized battlefield in the entire world when it actually comes to acreage and number of statuary on it. People say, oh, Gettysburg has more, but it's a little more spread out. As you drive around here, you'll drive past things that are right on top of each other time and time again. And naturally, things will be kind of shifted around as we create roads and we move things around. But I'm really glad Garry didn't decide to walk to this next stop, because this is going to take us a while to get down there.
Yeah, this is, get ready for a long ride here. And let me go ahead, as the Gettysburg guy in the car, sort of, or a Gettysburg guy, let me agree with Chris heartily. There are almost just as many monument markers and tablets here, just short of Gettysburg, but the size in which they are placed is much less. There's much more statuary here, especially when you include the busts. They are just all over the place. Hold on, let's look at one of the road cuts here, one of the two road cuts of the old Jackson Road. We're going to see another one up there that figures especially prominently in the battle. And you know, settle in. I think we're going to go ahead and just start listing off the order of battle while we get to our next stop. So let's start it. So U.S. Grant is in command of the Union Army here, and he has got some corps commanders, Sherman, and okay, we're here.
Glad we had cruise control for that ride.
Here we are, you know, and we hope, you know, it's a battlefield, but you can enjoy yourself on a battlefield. The veterans enjoyed themselves on the battlefield, and we can get serious, we can get heavy, and we can also, you know, talk, you know, about and make this an enjoyable experience. Let's swivel around and see what Chris has to say.
Just real fast before we go to the 3rd Louisiana Redan, we have down here below us the old visitor center / superintendent's house. But most importantly, just peeking up behind a tree or right beside a tree will be an upright cannon sitting down there, and that is the spot of the surrender. So one of the reasons that it is so important to come up to this portion of the battlefield, you have the largest monument on the battlefield. You have the Shirley House, which is a wartime structure. You have the Confederate position up here, and now you also have the surrender site.
And let me do two more things while we're here then too, because, you know, just imagine the moment after 47 days of siege, after this whole campaign that Grant and the Confederates and the Union had gone through in Pemberton. The Confederates realized that they have no more hope, that Pemberton's going to have to meet with Grant, and that it takes place over there is just wild to contemplate, especially when you try to contemplate what this terrain looks like. We'll try to flash up a picture showing what this looked like in this exact vicinity, specifically the picture of a tower that the Union built right almost behind me called the Coonskins Tower. It was a nickname of one of the soldiers who was here. I believe it was right over there. They took railroad ties and made a big tower out of it. And it appears in the photo, and you can see the works leading right up to it, almost right where we stand here. And I think that that's one of our jobs. If Chris points out the surrender, this is the area where Grant and Pemberton and all the soldiers that were here were actually interacting. Let me hit one more that Chris probably knows more about, but this is the site of it. You know, the Union, when they got to this particular gully right here, you know, you could see how high of a plateau that is, and they could move their guns forward, but that doesn't do them any good if they couldn't shoot over them. They needed mortars to lob guns. They didn't have mortars, so they actually took trees and hollowed them out and wrapped them in iron and made mortar guns that they were able to use, and they worked apparently, at least for a little while. So pretty interesting what soldiers will do when they need to. To Chris's right, if I may, if you do a 180 here, that's Andrew Hickenlooper. He is the chief engineer for, if I'm correct, is it Logan's division or maybe Sherman's Corps? Chris isn't correcting me, so one of those two is right. And he is going to supervise these approaches as you can get closer to the Confederates.
Logan's division.
Logan's division? Mm-hmm. Okay. And you can see that we are getting closer. Look, Chris, look at all these red signs and Confederate monuments. These are Confederate cannons. And the Union approaches are getting right here. Close enough what? To dig a mine that they're going to be able to explode not once but twice in late June of 1863.
Yeah, Garry brought up the sweet gum mortars. Those sweet gum mortars, some of the original cannon created, the most ancient cannon, were actually made out of wood. So he's not teasing you there, and they just wrap iron bands around them, and they start to use them because they didn't have siege mortars to move up. So this is, you know, figuring out what you can do on the spot. I think Garry also pointed out mine warfare. You know, there are about, 14 mines that are dug out?
13.
13. 13 mines that are dug out here. And people think of, when they think of mining operations, I think Americans only think of the crater in Petersburg on July 30th of 1864. But mining is very integral to siege warfare all throughout history. This is in Austria. The Ottoman Turks came there and blew up part of the wall there using mines. During the World Wars, there are still mines that are underneath a place called the Ypres salient that were unexploded because they didn't go off and they forgot where they were on the map.
Hold on for a second. We are 30 minutes in and Kris has brought up Ypres.
Doing well today. But these mines, you know, the idea is to blow a hole in these various portions of the line. And mine warfare up here was very, very personal. They could easily dig into the soil up here. It's not as clayey as most people think. It's actually a light soil, so they could go through it. And so you would have one mine coming underneath the Confederate lines and then the Confederates counter mining, trying to find those guys. And if they bumped into each other, you could have underground warfare. Also, if you located an enemy mine, you could actually open up the top of it, because the idea was you dig this mine, you put a big chamber at the end of it underneath a position like this, pack it full of gunpowder, and you make it explode. Well, if you can actually dig into that mine shaft, what you can do is actually release some of the pressure from that explosion. And what you would see is maybe an explosion along the Confederate lines, but then a big firestorm come up out of the ground elsewhere, and that might dilute the actual power of one of those mines. There's a lot of interesting things that is happening out here, plus the sharpshooter towers that Garry pointed out. One thing I'd just like to point out from up here, and we can move around, it's just coming up here to the top of the Confederate works. We can now see the red backing of one of our signs up here. This is going to tell you that this is the 3rd Louisiana Redan on the left of the Jackson Road, and Jackson Road's right behind us. But this is a War Department tower, informational, extraordinarily text heavy, but it's out here to tell us about what happened. But from this position, Tim Smith pointed out the other day, you can see end to end on the siege lines. If you look off in that direction, you might see the Vicksburg water tower, non-historic, but off to its right, you might see the large obelisk monument that looks like the Washington Monument. You're actually looking at the U.S. Navy Monument. That's on the federal right flank. Down in the opposite direction, you can actually see one of the stacks of one of the factories down near the riverfront. That's the Union left flank. We are up towards the middle. So with this line going around us, from standing up on this position, you can actually see end to end of just how far this line was. And the original Confederate line was roughly 9 miles with about 9 forts along it. So this is what we see up here. So this is a great location to come, and you can also see the depth of that road cut.
Yeah, and we're just a little lower than parts of the Great Redoubt. We're at the 3rd Louisiana Redan. The Great Redoubt is on the other side of the Jackson Road. It's no surprise. This is an important spot. This is the road that links Vicksburg and Jackson. They had to fortify this well, and so they did. I want to stress that when you just looked at these 2 points, it seems mind-boggling that this area of operations can be this large when the armies are compacted for battle and siege, but so it is. Have you ever seen like the Rose Bowl or a major stadium empty out? Now imagine 2 of those things or 1.5 of those things emptying out, and then you have to put them in line, control them, feed them, and you have to have these operations, and sometimes shoulder to shoulder. These lines could be 6, 7, 8 miles long. It's mind-boggling to think about. One other thing I want to encourage you to do while you're up here is, you know, while you're here, everybody comes and sees the 3rd Louisiana Redan, and this is my 12th or 13th visit here, but for the first time, just yesterday, I saw some red signs and decided to walk along the line of the Mississippi regiments, and then I was greeted by another battery and other signs and whatnot, and learned a little bit more. So when you do get out to the battlefield with your Tahoma bag, make sure you walk around and you just learn more. There's tablets down there, and I learned some things I didn't know before, even though I've been here a whole bunch of times before.
And the one thing I want to point out with the water tower, remember, there's a city down here. It was a wartime population at Vicksburg of about 5,000 people. By the time that the siege comes around, there's probably about 4,000 people in the city. So on the far side of Vicksburg will be the Mississippi River, and that is filled with federal boats. The United States Navy's out there. So on one side, we have the Mississippi River as well as the U.S. Navy. On this side, we have the United States Army. And this is the Army of the Tennessee under Ulysses S. Grant. And in the middle, we have that city. So any sort of fire that will take place from our batteries that we started from, and they overshoot from here, this target has depth. So if you don't hit the lines up here of Confederates, you might actually hit the city, and vice versa with the Federal guns firing up into this position. One lady said that she thought that the Federals only stopped firing 3 times during the day, 8 a.m., noontime, and 8 p.m., and that was for their meals, is what she figured is why they stopped firing. So hundreds of rounds will go into this city throughout the day, just raining in, and it's going to be a tough place to go, and that's where we'll start to see the caves and different systems like we'll see around here, where civilians will go out and dig their caves and go and hide in those to give them some sort sense of cover.
And it's a great point, Kris. I was talking to Terry Winchell the other day, former chief historian here, and he's talked about, the reason the city takes so much shell fire is because the Federals, they can't depress their cannons in such a way. So as they shoot at these works, if you miss by an inch, you might as well miss by a mile, he said. And the arc of that shell is then what's going to take it into the city. So it's not like the Federals are intentionally targeting the city. It's just that's where all these overshots are going. So the mortars that Garry and Kris mentioned earlier are a chance to kind of change that arc and lob stuff into rather than at the Confederate position. The other thing I just wanted to mention is Garry talked about the Mississippians down off on this ridge over here is one of the kind of cool human interest stories. Douglas the Camel belonged to a Mississippi regiment. He belonged to their musicians. He carried their musical instruments around, and for some reason they have him up here near the front of the line. He doesn't get killed by any of that artillery fire, but finally a Union sharpshooter kills the camel. Poor Douglas. Some Union sharpshooter has no sense of humor, kills the camel. By that point in the siege, things are so dire enough for the Confederates that they're actually going to eat camel for a few days because there isn't much else for them to eat. And those deteriorating conditions really become the story of not only the Confederate Army, but the civilians in this. We've talked about how they're living in caves and scratching out a living, and there are no dogs or cats left in the city by the end. Douglas is one more example of just how dire those things are.
And I would just add on to that, one lady said that the cats, the dogs, and the rats all seem to slowly kind of fade away as the time goes on throughout the siege. They seem to disappear. They're not out there, so they're desperate to take on any sort of sustenance that they can.
Yeah, I mean, imagine a position you're in when you're writing things like, we preferred mule to rats, and we preferred both to horses and dogs. I want to tell another story here because it's not only interesting and maybe somewhat inspirational and sad at the same time, but there are 2 mines exploded right here. And by the way, what happens is that the Union soldiers, Logan's guys under Hickenlooper, with Hickenlooper's help, get so close that their approach is right here. They dig the mines and they blow up 2,200 pounds of powder right near this position here. And they're going to send some guys into the breach, okay? And there's going to be a 26-hour fight for this. The Union did breach in here. Mississippi troops come in and reinforce the Louisianians. You got Arkansas batteries and whatnot, all fighting, and it is a brutal fight, reminiscent of Spotsylvania's Muleshoe, where they're fighting in this position. Eventually, the Union falls back. A couple days later, they blow up another mine, 1,800 pounds this time, a little bit smaller. Grant had learned his lesson. He does not make the attack this time, and the surrender is going to come not long after that. But during that attack, or during that mining operations, the Confederates were, as Kris said earlier, doing counter mines, looking for the Union mines at this point. And there were slaves digging them. I'm pretty sure it was 8 of them at that time. 7 of them were killed in the explosion of the second mine, but 1 was blown upward. I think his name was Abraham. And let me sidetrack for that. When you look in the soldier records, you actually see something like 21 soldiers named Abraham Lincoln in those records, and I think 20 of them are black. These are people who did not want to keep the names they were given, and when told to sign up, I conjecture at least said Abraham Lincoln. Okay, thank you, Kris. So this man was blown up sky high and blown into the Union lines, away from Confederate lines, and then he landed inside Union lines, and by every account, on his head. And he didn't have a scratch on him. He popped up and he was okay. And somebody had the nerve to ask him, how high'd you go? And he said, I don't know, but I reckon about 3 miles. Landed on his head. Somebody said, oh my God, people want to meet him. And they put him in a tent and exploited him and, charged 50 cents to, see him, and he could tell his story, the man who was blown to freedom. And so he was. Unfortunately, we don't know a lot about him afterward or if he got a cut of that 50 cents. I'd like to hope that he did. I'd like to hope that he did. But that's just one of the so many stories here. Ultimately, the other mines were not really detonated, but there were another dozen mines ready to be detonated, and smartly the Confederates surrendered before that could happen. Anything else, Kris?
I just want to walk down here because we are surrounded by fire anthills, and I'm trying to keep everyone out of it. One thing we haven't mentioned is please click the subscribe button. Please hit that bell notification. Check out battlefields.org, and you can learn more about the American Battlefield Trust. We have a fantastic animated map of the Vicksburg campaign. We have great Infor videos, and of course we have our battle app, which is free. And Garry is also sporting our battle maps of the Western Theater, which will tell you about the Vicksburg campaign, and we tell them through Steve Stanley's fantastic maps, and that is a way to help support battlefield preservation and education. Garry?
You all, let me end on a different way than we usually end on, and by saying that Kris, it's just a pleasure to be out here with you guys. It's not only instructional, I learn every time I'm with you guys, but it's also a little bit fun, and we're also in our favorite places, and we can do that only because of your support. You all provide the funds for us to be able to travel these places and bring these videos to you. So like Kris said, please subscribe to our channels, tell your friends about us, and we'll do more and more of this, even in the West, even in the Trans-Mississippi, and of course in the East. So thank you, Kris. Thank you, Kris. Thank you, everybody, for watching and for supporting battlefield preservation and education.